what we have here is sarcasm, something I'm very familiar with. I'm sure some of you are. He clearly was crapping on the concept of an indulgence. And then he started making fun of relics. So when he says 18 of 12 horses, I've mixed the two, 18 of 12 apostles are buried in Spain, obviously is that possible? What is he implying with that statement?
They're fake.
Yeah. You're faking them to get money because people have to pay a little money to come see it. And he even mentions 19,000 bones, the greatest collection in Europe. He's talking about Frederick the Wise. Without getting into that detail because it's a movie and it would be too much, but he's talking about the collection we just read about. Here's the remarkable thing. Frederick the Wise will hear Luther preach on this subject numerous times in the coming years. He will completely change his stance on relics, breaking up and selling his own collection and opposing relics. So if you are a hardcore supporter of something and then you completely switch your allegiances, there must be a really good reason for that, right? If the next time we had class, you see me wearing a UK shirt, first of all, I'm being held hostage. Someone call for help. Because no other reason for that to ever happen. But there had to be some reason. Like my niece plays volleyball for Lindsay Wilson, and they are UK blue and white. And so when we go watch her play under normal circumstances, I'm happy to support her, but I'm going to wear the white shirt. I'm not going to wear the blue with the white. I can't do it. Even for blood, it's too close. Start twitching if I put that on, okay? So the point is this, outside that I'm probably insane, but it is that this man will completely switch his mindset to support Martin Luther's beliefs. So therefore, he will be a hardcore supporter. And whenever he will start to be challenged, Frederick is going to be like a big old mama bear, just putting her arms around him and protecting him. So let me be very clear. No Freddie the Wise, Luther's probably going to be killed. And then he does not get to do the things he will do in the coming years. Very clear on that. Everybody understand me? Does that make sense? Again, keep a list. That's one you should have because you will see this question again. All right, next. What is Luther most angry about? What is his greatest frustration in all of this process? What really makes him angry?
The corruption in the church.
Too vague. I need something more specific.
Indulgences.
Indulgences. You got it. Okay. Now, indulgences, as I mentioned last week, are from the Middle Ages. They were given as rewards. Julius starts to sell them. Julius dies. He is replaced by the second of third popes we might know. And that his name is Leo the 10th. Leo the 10th will take over the papacy and be the pope under which Martin Luther will do what he does, which we'll talk about in about 2 minutes. Leo the 10th is a member of the Medici family. Yes, that Medici family. So he is committed to seeing Julius's project of building a brand new church through. Julius does the Sistine Chapel. He supports Raphael and Michelangelo. Leo is going to take it a step further, tear down the old church and build a brand new church, which to this day is still the largest church in the Christian world. And as some of you may know, if you go to Rome someday, which I hope you get to, the Colosseum, that huge arena, it looks kind of crappy on the outside. It used to be beautiful marble. That's because Leo had the marble removed from the outside and brought over about 5 miles away to build the huge chunk of St. Peter's Basilica. That marble is the marble that was on the outside of the Colosseum, which is kind of interesting recycling project, if you will. Okay? So, Leo says we got to pay for this. And this is the literal connection between the Renaissance and the Reformation. To build this beautiful, huge church, a giant work of art, we need money. So we're going to take the indulgence game way up. Leo is going to send his best priests, his most convincing speakers all over Europe to go to your town and give a speech and a sermon and get you to give that money. Martin Luther sees one of these speeches by a guy named Tetzel. He was mentioned in that last clip. Tetzel's pretty good and pretty convincing by all accounts, but he's famous because Luther saw him and this makes Luther angry. And then, of course, Luther will sit down and write down a bunch of complaints, which we'll talk about just after this short clip. So the famous phrase that Tetzel uses that would be great for you to drop into an essay or short answer about this topic, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, Let's look at the document. There, number 4. As soon as the coin and coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs. That's on a ceiling tile in my classroom. As soon as the coin and coffer rings, coin, of course, money. Coffer is a collection plate like my pencil holder here. Hear that sound? That's the sound of money going in there. That means whoever you paid for now is going to heaven. Your soul is leaving purgatory. Soon as the coin and coffer rings, soul from purgatory springs. That's the famous quote. And Luther is incensed because he feels like you are taking advantage of poor people who don't have much money to begin with to build a church a long way away from them that they will never see. And that is his greatest frustration. And he does not find indulgences in the Bible. Sola scriptura. Okay? So very briefly, this is another short clip. This shows Tetzel, played here by an actor called Alfred Molina. He's been in a lot of things. I don't know how many comic book movies you have seen, but the very first Spider-Man that came out like 10 years ago, pre-Marvel Universe, the bad guy was Dr. Octopus in that film, was played by this guy, Alfred Molina. So he does one thing that is extra historical. In other words, it's not true. We'll see if you can guess which thing he does in his short speech that might be untrue. All right, and I'll see if you can guess it. All right, let me pause. So, what's the mood of that speech? Chill?
Fire and brimstone.
Yeah, good vibes? No. He's going for the hard sell. Do you have time to think about it? Tonight. Now, what thing did he do you think was not historically accurate?
Burn his hand?
Yeah, the hand burning was made up. No evidence that ever happened. And we have lots of stories because, again, who's there? Priests. What can they do? Write. Nobles can write. You'd think if this happened hundreds of times across Europe, somebody would have written it down once, and we got nothing. So Hollywood ridiculousness, okay? But the rest of it's true. So it's come tonight, pay the money. And he wasn't lying about it. He's like, you will build this church. Very honest about what you're doing. And so that is what really sets off Luther. He's been going towards this for over 10 years of thinking and praying and writing and talking. And so he's going to sit down and write out his complaints. How many of those complaints might he have, kids?
95.
99?
95. That was really low energy there. 95. 95 theses. What are theses?
Like an educated guess.
Close. It's a plural of a word you all know, or at least you will know in this class.
Thesis.
It's a plural of thesis, yes. So they're short ideas. They're paragraphs. So this is not an 800-page document. This is like 30 pages. Now, they're all about indulgences. This is not about anything else. These are just, here's why I think indulgences are wrong, 95 reasons, which is fairly extensive. Again, Martin Luther is a former monk, a priest, and a professor of theology. He knows his stuff. You may disagree with him, and that's fine, but he knows his stuff, and he has been tormented for years. One of the reasons he becomes a priest and stopped being a monk, he thought if he helped people in a church, it might help him get over some of his concerns. It does not. Okay, it does not. So what does he do with this list of concerns?
Nails it to a church door.
Why, William? Or should I say the gong?
Because he wanted to directly send the message and also get it out there.
Yeah, because who goes to church?
Everyone.
It's like the Backstreet Boys said, everybody. Absolutely. So there we go. Everybody goes. You're welcome that I got to
Beautiful,
yell that in
Mr.
your, I know. I'm glad I got to yell that in your computer and overwhelm those of you wearing headphones. You're welcome. So, got to do what I got to do to torment you, even from afar. So on October 31st, you call it Halloween. I call it Reformation Day. He is going to nail his 95 Theses to the front door of the Wittenberg Cathedral for the reasons the gong stated. All right? Now, we're not sure if this is true. It might be theater. It might be a story made up a couple years later because it sounds cool, as opposed to like he humbly asked a local person to look at it. But regardless, the list gets out and people start to read it. Now, reason number 2 that Martin Luther gets away with this, that previous reformers had not, an invention.
Printing press.
Printing press.
Printing press. Woo woo. That's correct. Let us go indeed. The printing press is invented sometime around the early 1450s. We know printing was created in China, brought along the Silk Road to Europe through many trade routes, and eventually in Mainz, today what is Germany, a man named Johannes Gutenberg will set the type. So it used to be like done individually. He creates a machine where you set it on in a row and then you can mass produce it. This allows us to create copies of things much faster and therefore cheaper. We go from, in a normal setting when everybody's here, I have more books in my classroom, if you include some of the magazines and things I have, than the biggest library in England did in 1000 CE. And we're going to produce 1 million+ books in the 100 years after we create the printing press. So massive increase in the availability of written material, which also dramatically drops the price and also increases literacy to some extent. Not fully, we're not getting anywhere near a majority of people can read yet, but we increase it. Now, it's like going viral. Once you send out your message, someone may take it. Think of all the memes you know, where people have like goofy looks in their face. That wasn't the intent when that picture was taken, was it? But someone adapts it to that purpose. Martin Luther did not intend to wreck the church. Be very clear on that. His goal was reform. But this will make its way all across Europe within a year. King Henry VIII, sitting in England, will read the 95 Theses, get angry about them, write a short book describing why Martin Luther is wrong. It will make its way to Rome where the Pope reads it, and he will give King Henry VIII an award. The Defender of the Faith, which of course is irony's example in the dictionary. If you don't know, we'll get to it soon. And if you look at British coins, it still says FD, which is the Latin abbreviation for Defender of the Faith, on their coins today, 500 years later, which is kind of randomly interesting. Okay? So next time you're staring at a British coin, look for that. So the list is out there. Debate happens. Martin Luther, from what he writes in his diaries, says he thought we would have some honest discussion, and his hope is we would get some feedback and potentially some change. Pope Leo X, the Medici, is not interested in that. The Holy Roman Emperor is not interested in that. And so very quickly it becomes obvious this is not going to happen. We are not going to see these changes. And so for several years, we're skipping a lot obviously, Martin Luther is going to continue to write, and he gets angrier and louder and more straightforward in his examples. Okay, purgatory, not real, not in the Bible. He ends up with the Pope is not described, at least his power, in the Bible. So therefore, the Pope taking all this authority is made up. Once you start calling out the Pope, you are not making peace with the Catholic Church. Ain't going to happen. Okay? We basically have the world's first propaganda war. We start producing drawings, calling out the other side. The Lutheran supporters start calling the Pope the Antichrist, which is pretty bad. You saw in your textbook a painting of Luther. Shows him hanging out with his best friend, the devil. And out of the bottom of Luther's robe is a tail indicating he is a demon himself. So we get nasty, really nasty. Again, this is the really first modern propaganda war. We start mass producing all these papers and spreading them all over drawings usually. And Luther's not in charge of this. Luther does not want to be a Protestant pope. Let me say that again. Luther does not want to be the leader of the Protestants. That was not his goal. He is doing this, whether you agree or disagree with it, he is doing it because he believes it is spiritually correct. And the church has gotten beyond redemption at some point. So he will form his own church in protest. That's where we get the word Protestant from. So we start with a goal of reform. When that ain't working, we move to a desire to protest. Everybody good on that? Does that make sense? So it is decided that we are going to try Martin Luther for heresy. He is a heretic. He has gone against the church, and the punishment for heresy is, of course, death. Public burning alive. So his trial is called the Diet of Verms, which to us we're like, does that mean he had to eat worms? No. Verms is a city where the trial was held. A diet is from the Latin for a meeting. For example, the Japanese parliament to this day is called the Diet, which is not a Japanese word. It comes from Latin, oddly enough, which is interesting. But that's because they borrow a lot of their legislative structure from Europe. But I digress. So anyway, the Diet of Verms is Luther's trial, which will take place in 1521. So about 3.5 years after all this starts, we are going to try Martin Luther. Why did it take so long? Well, one of the things that happened was the Holy Roman Emperor had died in that time. And so this is reason number 3 and the last one why Luther gets away with it. The young man who will take over from his deceased father is named Charles V. Charles V is one of the most famous rulers in European history. He is a Habsburg, and the last Habsburg to rule both the Austrian and the Spanish sides of the family. So he will control most of Central and Eastern Europe. He will be the Holy Roman Emperor. He will control Spain, which also controls the Netherlands and Belgium at this time. And it also means he controls the Spanish Empire in the New World. He is one of the largest landowners in human history. His grandparents are Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. But in 1521, he's a young kid, barely a year and a half, still a teenager, into his emperorship. He ain't ready. He ain't ready. If an older, wiser ruler had been in power, they probably would have either killed Luther or found a way to get him to shut up and go away. And Charles just elevates and elevates and elevates because he keeps making mistakes. And so a more experienced, wise ruler probably would not have handled it the way Charles did. Now, again, he will go on to be awesome and do many great things in his career, but not yet. He's not ready. He's not ready. Does that make sense? He's like Louisville's punter. He will fumble his first snap and let the other team score a touchdown, for those of you that pay attention to those things. All right, so that's what happens. Now, let's go back to our documents very briefly, and we're going to look at Martin Luther's trial. Martin Luther is going to be asked, the fancy word is recant. To recant is to take back, to apologize for. He is going to be asked to look at all of his written works, of which there are many. He writes quite a bit in 1517 to 1521. And he's going to be asked to say, what do you think? Will you say no? Because here's the thing. Charles V does not want to execute Luther. He's afraid Luther will become a martyr and become a symbol and become even more popular. Okay? He does not want that to happen. Abel, it's a good thing I'm not epileptic because your phone movement would cause me to have a seizure. All right? So anyway, yes. If we can study that, that would be really good. I'm sure I'm not the only one who is bedazzled by your movement. So anyway, I understand you have the desire to get up and walk around. That's good. But if you're going to do that, at least turn your screen off for a second. So, we don't want anybody to get motion sickness. So anyway, the point is that it is decided that we're going to give him one more chance to not hurt him. And he is asked, will you recant? And so we're going to watch our final clip from the film Luther, the ultimate scene, the rising action, if you will. And so the climax, and we're going to see what he says. And this is almost entirely historically accurate because lots of people were there taking notes. You will see in the front, sitting on a throne, Charles V, young emperor, and you see he looks very, very young. You will see next to him a man in all red. That means he's a cardinal. He is the Pope's representative. He is going to be the bad guy in this scene, and you can tell because when he speaks in a very thick, heavy, stage British accent. And we know from many movies, for example, the Star Wars universe, that our bad guys are always British. That's just how it works, okay? And then we will see the Holy Roman electors sitting on the side next to our emperor, and they're wearing like leopard swag robes. I mean, that's all, I don't know what else to call it. Like, you have to have a lot of swag to wear leopard print, like snow leopard. And the old guy who will be wincing while Martin Luther's talking is his buddy and protector, Frederick the Wise. So we're going to hear what Luther had to say. And again, this is almost entirely accurate. The only thing we're not sure of is the last statement he will make. Did he actually say that or not? So we'll watch this clip. Was he going to say he was sorry and he was wrong? Nope. And he said it. If you can prove me by scripture, that's his whole thing. Sola Scriptura. So he will be found guilty of heresy. Ordinarily, that's punishment by death. Very briefly, to look at some documents, and we'll finish this up. You see here Note that the last statement he said, "Here I stand, I can do no otherwise," is in parentheses because that is actually disputed whether it was said at the time, because it was not in the original document of the trial. It is given later in other sources, so most people believe it is added at the end to kind of punch it up, which is interesting because the book it comes from is called Here I Stand, but he probably didn't actually say that. So he's like, whatever. Doc 6 is from Charles V. Okay? About halfway through towards the bottom, after having heard yesterday the obstinate, if you are obstinate, trust me, I know very well from my own history, what does it mean to be obstinate?
Stubborn?
Yeah, really stubborn. Good. So he's stubborn. He wouldn't admit he was wrong about this stuff. I regret that I have so long delayed in proceeding against him and his false teaching. I should have done this earlier. Again, not saying that murdering people is good, but he would have had a much better system if Charles had done so. I will have no more to do with him. He may return under a safe conduct. He can go back home safely, but without preaching or making any tumult or any trouble. Do you think Luther did that? No. So Martin Luther is going to go to the castle of Frederick the Wise. And there are people that would like to get him and kill him, but they won't mess with Frederick. So again, printing press, spreading his ideas all over the continent. Powerful political protector who has wealth and power to keep him sheltered in this about a year after his trial. He stays there for over a year. And third, a young, inexperienced ruler who probably plays it too cautiously when he should have been more aggressive in dealing with the situation. So Luther, in addition to his beliefs about all this, also is one of those people who believes, like Erasmus, our Christian humanist from last week, that the Bible should be widely available in local languages, the vernacular. So he will spend his year, at least the first part of it, translating the New Testament of the Bible into German for what we believe is the first time. He does so in 10 weeks. The New Testament is not short, so that's quite an accomplishment. He's an incredible scholar, very intelligent man. He will go on to write hymns. The Christian hymn, "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God," was written by Martin Luther, music and words. He'll become a pastor of a church. He believes that the Bible says nothing about the followers, the priests of Jesus, being married, so he gets married to a former nun, Katharina von Bora, and they have 8 children. He definitely reads the Bible verse that says, "Be fruitful and multiply," because he does that one. All right? And he will spend the next 35 years being a pastor. Now, lest we think he's really awesome and there's nothing he did wrong, he does write a 500-page book on how much he hates Jewish people. I mean, anybody can write 10 pages, but 500 pages, that's a lot of hate. So he is definitely a man of his time, which is to say anti-Semitic. Because we know that in Europe, they blame Jews for everything and did for hundreds of years, as I'm sure you well know. One of the things I like to say when we get to the 20th century is Hitler does not wave a magic wand and create anti-Semitism. He is building on something that has been a part of European culture for literally centuries, unfortunately. Okay? So, Luther wants nothing to do with politics, and this is our last point on Luther. He is not interested in being a Protestant pope, if you will, as I already mentioned. He takes no interest in it. He wants to lead a church, and that is his calling and his belief. But might others be interested in being political leaders using religion as a tool? You better believe it. So remember, the Holy Roman Empire, 360 independent states loosely coming together. Many of those princes, dukes, whatever you want to call them, decide that Lutheranism is for them. Hundreds of them, in fact. What if they don't care about Luther's religious beliefs? Then why would they convert to Lutheranism? Any guesses? If there's no pope in this new church, who's in charge?
They have all the power.
And wealth. I saw Mac doing this. They would not have to pay church taxes because there is no church organization to pay taxes to. So many of these princes, dukes, fiefs, whatever you want to call them, are going to convert to Lutheranism and make their people convert, not because they believe Luther is spiritually correct, but because they have less overhead and more power. I know it's shocking that people would use religion as a cover for their political and economic choices, but there you go. And that's all religions and many cultures all over the place. And it's other mechanisms. People are going to make excuses and take things that are pure and of noble intent and try to ruin them and use it. And that happens across all cultures. Now, it's human nature, I would argue. We do that stuff. Okay? So, to that end, German peasants start to rebel against their feudal landlords. This was in your reading, correct? Because they're like, well, Luther is rebelling against the church. I should rebel against my landlord. How's old Marty feel about this? You a big supporter? Owen Phillips, you're shaking your head no. That is correct. Last share of today. You don't even need to read the document. Read the title of document 8. This is from a pamphlet Luther wrote. The title gives it away, doesn't it? So, just to be clear, this is kind of fun. Luther is straightforward here. If the peasant is in open rebellion, then he is outside the law of God, for rebellion is not simply murder, but like a great fire which attacks and lays waste a whole land. Rebellion brings with it a land full of murders and bloodshed, makes widows and orphans, and turns everything upside down like a great disaster. Therefore, let everyone who can smite, slay, and stab, secretly or openly, remembering that nothing can be more poisonous, hurtful, or devilish than a rebel. This is a man who's a pastor of a religion, remember? It is just as when one must kill a mad dog. If you don't strike him, he will strike you and the whole land with you. Oh my goodness. In other words, in 1500s language, get your name out your mouth, okay? Do not use my movement to justify your rebellion. That's Luther's thing. Okay? So he is strongly against this. These wars will continue for decades. Decades. Until finally we have one of the earliest landmark pieces of legislation in European history, a treaty. And this is a treaty you should know. It is signed in 1555. And it is only good for the HRE. This is not a European document. This is a HRE document. But it's called the Peace of Augsburg. Augsburg, as usual, being a German city, you name treaties after where they are signed. 1555, so 30 years after these rebellions start, and almost 40 years after Luther nails something to a church door. Does anyone remember what this document does? Because it was in your reading, but there's a lot of things in your reading you may not remember.
Doesn't it make Lutheran legal?
It does, Katie, correct. Only in the HRE. So it is the first tiny, 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 tiny baby steps toward religious toleration. In the HRE states, the local ruler may choose the religion of he and his people. And you have two choices, Catholic or a Lutheran. So there's about 9 things in that statement that are not really tolerant, but considering what has been going on in the context of the day, it is the first tiny step towards eventual religious toleration and acceptance. Does that make sense? The most common thing that is a mistake in this is people will say, the Peace of Augsburg changes religious toleration across. No, 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 no. It's just the HRE. It's not all of Europe. Just the HRE. Okay? And we really don't see any major developments for almost 100 years of any improvement. So it's not like this happens and then everything changes. No, it's a slow process. It's a slow process. We really don't start seeing what we would call modern religious toleration until the Enlightenment in the 1800s. Okay? Now,
What's the HRE?
what?
HRE?
It means Holy Roman Empire. Does that work, Lily? Okay. Holy Roman Empire, in essence, modern Germany with a little bit of surrounding territory. So 2 last things and we'll call it a day. Number 1, Reformation, mass movement or elite movement? You got a 50-50 shot. Somebody be bold.
Mass movement.
Mass movement. Any guesses why? Kennedy, you said so. Why is it mass movement? Who's affected by changing churches?
it's all of the like peasants and stuff, and the people that would be considered elite are the ones that are getting come at. So
Yeah, it's definitely a mass movement because outside of a small exception of Jewish people, they're all Catholic in Western Europe before this. So this affects millions of people. Now, the statement the cardinal made in the last video clip, you, Martin Luther, think you can challenge the Catholic Church. You know, he's using that really overdone British accent. That's essentially why the Reformation is important, whether you agree or disagree with it. Again, as we will discuss next week, the Catholic Church today looks back at this time and says, yeah, we made some mistakes. It wasn't our best hour. You know, you have popes talk about that later on. Luther makes quite a few mistakes as well. Again, anti-Semitism being definitely one of them. But what this does, it challenges the most powerful institution in Europe. Since the Roman Empire fell apart 1,000 years before, no empire had been stronger than the church. Most kings bowed down to the Pope because the Pope could ultimately control their soul if he needed to. So this is challenging the most powerful thing in existence, which is going to have an impact on, say, I don't know, like scientific discovery, because once you challenge the authority of the Pope, we should start asking questions about why the world is the way it is. Why do we have certain events in our lives? Why do people get sick? Or why does it? Those are all things that we don't have all the answers even to this day, but we start asking more and more questions, which is the basis of the scientific revolution, which is coming up next. So no Reformation, no challenging of that church authority, probably no scientific revolution, and then no Enlightenment, which is challenging government authority. And maybe no modern world. And there are bad things about the modern world, clearly, but the Reformation sets us on a course towards European domination. Okay? Because once you've challenged the most powerful institution, what are you afraid of? And of course, the answer is nothing. Okay? If you beat Mr. Rich in trivia, which would never happen, but let's say you did, you're going to be incredibly confident because you've beaten the gangster trivia. Okay? Again, unlikely, if not impossible, but dreams are good, kids. I encourage you to have them. All right. Last thing. There is one group, and your book mentions a couple small groups. We're not going to get into all of them, but the one that's most famous are called the Anabaptists. Baptist with Anna in front, without. Can anyone tell me? There's one belief they're known for, and they are in your study guide, by the way. Anyone know what that belief may in fact be? Maybe you haven't gotten this far yet in your reading. I thought you had.
Wouldn't it be like the belief that somebody shouldn't be baptized to be Christian or something? Is that what they're based on?
They believe people should be baptized.
Have a rebaptism for adults.
There you go. Yeah, tag team, ladies. Good job. Yes, they believe you should be baptized, but when you are old enough to make the decision for yourself. So no infant baptism. This will eventually influence many Protestant sects, probably most famously the Amish and the Mennonites, who how their belief system works. You are in the church and you are raised in it, you know, dressing simply for the Amish, ignoring modern technology. And then at 16, you have what is called Rumspringa, which there was a reality show a couple years ago about this, where at 16 you can do whatever you want, dress how you want, drink, smoke, engage in various activities that are illicit for 2 years. And they actually brought Amish teenagers on Rumspringa to New York City for a reality show. It was called Living Amish, maybe something like that. It was popular maybe 6 or 7 years ago because my kids all knew it back then. It was like an MTV or VH1 thing or one of those. And so you live however you want to for 2 years, and at 18 you got to decide, do I go back to my family and my faith and give all that up? Or do I go live in the world how I want to, but then I can no longer be associated with my family? But you're 18, you decide. So they believe that an infant cannot make that decision. So it has no purpose. The other thing they believe in, which is quite controversial, is they believe in a separation of church and state. I'm going to say that again, and this is our last comment for the day. They believe in a separation of church and state. Obviously, the Catholic Church, the two are closely intertwined. And while Luther doesn't care about politics, the Lutheran leaders of the HRE certainly do. And so this is the one thing that unites Lutherans and Catholics in the early days of the Reformation. They both hate Anabaptists. And so the Anabaptists had set up a city in the city of Munster, the namesake of a version of cheese, in today what is Germany. And in addition to some of their other beliefs, they also start to believe in what's called free love. No long-standing romantic relationships. You may enjoy each other's company with whomever you like. In the 1530s. That's some freaky stuff for our ancestors.
That's crazy.
It is. And so a united Catholic Lutheran army surrounds Munster, puts it under siege, and eventually takes over the city. And this is my last point. To show that this will not be tolerated, the 3 leaders who survived the battle are put on trial, and of course are found guilty, and they're going to be executed. But we're not going to burn them at the stake. We are going to place them in iron cages attached to the bell tower of the church, hundreds of feet in the air, and they will slowly starve to death. And if you go today to the city of Munster, Germany, the cages are still there, and you can see them. So if you would like to Google Munster Cathedral cages or something like that, you will see these very cages, and they are still there, and they're a big tourist attraction. I have never been to Munster, but you better believe I'm going someday, and I will see that. Heck yeah. All right? So the Anabaptists are a threat because they challenge church and state being separated, which we don't get really for another 300 years almost. Okay? So next week, we will get into Calvin, Henry VIII, the Catholic Church's response, and then we'll move on. I realize we're already a little behind our schedule. That's okay. I will cut corners here or there, or if I need to schedule an extra session and those that can't make it, and I have a video and you watch it when you can. But if we end up getting behind schedule at the end of the 6 weeks, I will schedule one additional session and we'll catch up sometime.